lesson is for S4 to 6, so the senior phase, and it's all about top tips for close reading. Now, the way these are going to work, anybody that's just tuning in, is the afternoon sessions are primarily for those in senior phase, and the 10:30 lessons are for juniors. Please, if you haven't already done so, join the Aim Higher Facebook page, and on that you'll have the chance to join groups and there'll be work to do after the lessons. I'm so busy trying to put the lessons on that I will probably put a lot of resources on at the weekend, so just bear with me, because as you know, I've only launched yesterday. I would love it if you could maybe tell people about the channel. I don't seem to be getting a huge amount of followers yet, so I would love it. As you can see, I'm bright and brazy in your living room, so it'd be great if you could tell people and try and promote it a little bit. A lot of work does go into it. I know it doesn't look it. I look like I'm a natural. But anyway, so the first thing that we do for every lesson is I like to give you a word of the day, especially when you're in senior phase, to try and show your teacher, the SQA, that you have an extensive vocabulary. You want to start using different types of words and get away from the sort of ones that you would use at primary, sad, that sort of stuff. So today's word of the day is adversary. Alright, the word adversary is basically an opponent, somebody you're in contest with, or you've got a dispute with, or you're in conflict with, basically an enemy. An example on the screen is Jacob beat his old adversary in the golf competition. Yes, so also spelling is important. We are going to do a spelling bee every couple of weeks, so I'm going to give you a spelling word of the day. Again, I'm going to upload those at the weekend so that you can get all 20 words, and then we'll have a wee spelling quiz next week once we've gone through them all. Alright, today's spelling word is rhythm. Rhythm. It's a bit good, nice way of saying it, when you see the word rhythm. I also like it because what do you notice about the word? There's no vowel. I never noticed that before. Well, now you do. There's no vowel. A-E-I-O-U, remember. So that's one of your spelling words. Alright, I also enjoy a pun. As you know, I'm a very fun teacher, or I try to be, and I am cheesy in the class and in life, to be fair. So today's pun is Mr. Sean Connery. Shaking not stop, Miss Money Penny. Half of you will be going, I have no idea who that is. Who's Sean Connery? Is he in the group, or who is he? So he says in this, I must ask you a question, but I'm shaving it for later. Sorry. Right, anybody who joined yesterday. So close reading is also known as RUAE, reading for understanding, analysis and evaluation. It's shortened to RUAE, which always makes me think of RUAE, 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 RUAE. Ah. Sorry if I just burst your eardrums. So just a little starter task to get us going. Get that old cog, the cogs up there turning. We had a little look at this yesterday, so if you were joining us yesterday, you'll have a little head start. If not, I'm going to give you a minute to try and work out what the difference is between those three words on the screen. You've maybe covered these in other subjects. So what does to understand something mean? What does it mean if you analyse? And the same with evaluate. You don't have to write them down, just maybe chat with someone or yourself and say, what do those three words mean? Okay, I'll be back in a wee minute. Alexa, play. Alexa, stop. Thank you, doll. So what did you come up with? To understand, it's all about knowledge, isn't it? To know something. It's hard to try and describe the word understanding without saying you understand. So it's about knowledge, grasping what is trying to be said or come across. To analyse is obviously to inspect, to examine. You analyse, you look much more deeply into something. And if you evaluate, just like the scales, do I prefer chocolate or crisps? What a dilemma. But you're evaluating, you're assessing something. So you're saying, how good is it? So like we said yesterday, you would look at things like TripAdvisor, or, you know, when the judges give up their paddles on Strictly. 10. 10 from Len. So that's you assessing how good something is. So that's the difference between the three. You need to get your head around what those three words mean, because basically they are the stem at the root of everything that you do in National 5 and Higher English. So that's just a wee summary of what we've said. So to understand is what's been said. To analyse is how it's been said. So usually in English we look at the literary techniques, devices, figures of speech, that sort of thing. And to evaluate is how effective is it being said. So how effective is that particular technique or device. The close reading exam is worth 30 marks for both levels, Nat 5 and higher. So it's 30% of your final grade. So obviously every mark counts. It's a non-fiction passage which you won't have seen before, unlike the other parts of the exam that you do prepare for and you do know the text before you go into the hall. This is an unseen passage. Usually it's from a top quality newspaper article. So for Nat 5 it's one passage that you have to look at, then answer the questions, and for higher it's 2 passages. Oh, scary. But the good news for you is you get an hour and a half. Again though, that time limit is going to be, you know, a sort of obstacle to try and overcome, but I'll be helping you try to do that over the next little while. I'll give you top tips on how to cut down those answers and the time it takes. So as it says there, it forms 30 marks out of the 100, and the exam is 70 marks and the folio's the 30. It is a bit more nerve-wracking, this exam, because you've not seen it before, but that doesn't mean you can't prepare and understand the difference between the types of questions and what is going to be required of you before you walk in. Again, as I've said, it's a non-fiction text and it'll have been chosen, the SQA took a long time choosing the text. The topics can totally vary. They tried to make it more engaging, I would say, in the last few years. It's been much better than it used to be way back in the day when I started marking. So they try and use quite engaging topics that teenagers would appreciate. So recent ones for Nat 5, for example, is football and, you know, your sort of determination to get better. McDonald's. So, you know, they have been picking much better topics. And it's high quality articles. Obviously it's going to be enough that you can find different techniques that have been used. So obviously it's got to be a decent quality. So you need to, my top tip for a start is, I get asked a lot, how can I help my kid? They don't seem to be doing an awful lot of homework. They probably have been getting a lot of homework, they're just hiding it. But one of the best pieces of advice I would say is from S1, to be fair, and upwards, start reading newspapers, looking at the article, what is it about, try to learn how to sum up what the article's about. That's helping your understanding skills. Can you spot techniques in it? That sort of thing. So quite often when I was at school, parents used to ask how they can support their child, and I always said, start reading newspapers, sit together, get them to summarise what the article's about. Always think, what is the main purpose of this article? Why is it being written? Who is the audience? Who is the target audience? So these are the sorts of things you can start preparing for, so that when you open the exam, you don't end up going, oh, what's this? I've never read a newspaper in my life. Because it also helps to enhance your vocabulary too. Right, so getting into the actual top tips. Number 1, big rule. Read the whole passage. Don't be one of those numpties that they open the exam, you'll know what it's like. There's 200 kids in the hall, and within a minute you'll hear. That's when you go, oh, they've started. I haven't even started. I'm going to fail. That's it. I'm on the door for the rest of my life. Don't do that. Instead of thinking like that, you think, what an idiot. Why have they started? They've obviously not read the whole thing. Just ask yourself, would you read one verse of a poem or one paragraph of a short story or a novel and then try and write about it? No. Because you wouldn't have a Scooby-Doo where it was going next. So same with a RUAE. You've got to look at the whole picture. So you won't be able to ask, who's it for, what's it about, unless you've read the whole thing. So even if it takes you 10 or 15 minutes, just read the whole lot, let it sink in. What's the article about? What are they trying to say? What are their main views on it? Who's it for? That sort of thing. So it'll be a lot more difficult to answer questions if you've only read a paragraph or a sentence, or if you read the question first and then go, oh yeah, I'll just look at that. I'll look at those 3 lines and then I'll be laughing. Sorry. Right, so another thing to consider is purpose and audience. Who wrote the article? Where's it from? Why do you think they wrote it? Why did they sit down and write that? What are they trying to persuade you to agree with, or what is their main points that they're making? Who's the target audience? So if it's an article about McDonald's and how it's changed, who's going to read that? So obviously more young people use video games, that sort of thing, or McDonald's, so that's why the SQA would maybe pick those, because it would be more engaging. You know, if you were writing about what compost to use in your garden, that would engage young people, wouldn't it? So that's what I mean. So just try to think, why have they written it and who's it aimed at? Don't panic, like I've said. In the long run, you'll answer better if you've read the whole thing. Okay, so that's my first piece of advice. Read the whole passage. Secondly, don't write too much. You've got a marking scheme at the side of the questions. You need to pay as much attention to that as the question itself. So obviously, as I've said, 1 mark is 1%, and you're writing roughly a sentence a mark. If you're writing more than that, then you run the risk of running out of time. And as I've said, every single mark counts. And I remember, you know, years of, obviously I've done this for a long time, but kids would say, calm down, miss, it's only 1 mark I've missed out, it's only 2 marks, whatever. And I say, oh really? You get the brown envelope through your door in August and it says 49%. I said 1 mark would be a pass or a B or an A. So every single mark counts, right? So that's why if you're writing paragraph, 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 then you're not going to get to the end and finish. So you need to start practicing at shortening your answers down. At higher, you maybe have to write a wee bit more of a detailed sentence, but it should still just be roughly a sentence. And obviously running out of time, as it says there, you're just chucking marks away. You know, or if you miss loads of questions out, I'll come back to them. I mean, there's nothing wrong with missing one out and then going back to it, but, you know, I've marked papers over the year where there's been 1 kid in an exam, you know, mark, and they've maybe missed out 9 questions out of 12. That's just not good. So, we task for you now to consider talking about trying to write concisely. So if you have a look at these 2 examples, and then I'll show you what I mean. So a question in the exam could be something like this. Look at line 46 to, I should say 48, sorry, and then explain in your own words what the writer means when he says or calls the response deeply ingrained. So that's an example of a past paper question. Look at this. So this is the sorts of things as teachers we'll see. When the writer thinks that something is deeply ingrained, I think that they might be saying that if something is deeply applied, that this has been put in very much, that something is there to stay and that it's hard to get rid of. I think about wells and large holes. If something is deep, something that has been put far down so it's fixed. Are you still awake? With the word ingrained, I think this means that it has been embedded and is now traditional. It is something we keep doing and that we know really well. So that is what I think something deeply ingrained is. Right? 10 seconds. What is wrong with that answer? Try and pick 2 things that they've done wrong. I'm back. What'd you come up with then? First thing I would say, the first sentence. When the writer thinks, it should say, that something is deep. I did that deliberately just to show you the kind of things that kids write. When the writer thinks that something is deeply ingrained, I think that they might be saying that all of that is waffle. You're not going to get any marks for simply regurgitating, repeating what the question's asking. So there's one thing I'll teach you in a wee second to stop you having to do that. From primary 1, you're told you must write in full sentences, Leslie. Use the words of the question in your answer. Fine, that's great. But in a RUAE exam, the only reason that it's beneficial to rewrite the whole word of the question is, that's right, because it keeps you on task. However, there's a much easier, quicker way of doing that without having to write that waffle. So you haven't said anything interesting there. You could even start with, if something is deeply applied. That's where they should start this question, their answer. Last sentence as well. That is what I think something deeply ingrained is. Now look at how much they've written. Can I just tell you, it's worth that. 2 marks. If you're writing all of that for 2 marks, can you imagine how much you're going to have written by the hour's up? Your wee hand will be like a little withered plant or it's stuck. You'll come out with cramp. So you do not need to write that much. Here's the second example. Deeply means something that's completely, profoundly applied. Bullet point. Second bullet point, ingrained. Means it's been fixed or rooted. It's been around a while. 2 marks. So that is an ideal answer. Now, remember, as SQA markers, they are human beings. If you're writing War and Peace for a little 2 marker and we have to sit like that for half an hour trying to find the answer, we're going to be, tired by the end of your paper. So if you present that, where all we do is tick, 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 then we'll get through it much quicker, we're in a much better mood, we don't have to write as much, and it's really for your benefit to make sure that you get to the end. So that's an ideal answer. Obviously I'm going to do a little bit more on this later on, later in the lessons in between now and the summer, to show you how to apply these sorts of skills. The best piece of advice I've got for you, I've not got a highlight here, I should have had one, is to use a highlighter pen. That's just as important as taking in a biro, as far as I'm concerned. This is the tool that will stop you having to regurgitate all those questions. So instead of writing, we know that it is deeply ingrained because, and all that, all you do is, you get your highlighter and you highlight the keywords of the question. Then that keeps you focused on answering it without having to re-churn out all the words of the question again. So you can just do it like Nick says, or Nike, I never know how to pronounce it. So highlight the keywords of the question to keep you focused so you can get straight to the answer. That stops you regurgitating those words that are unnecessary, don't get you any marks anyway. The other reason that highlighters are amazeballs is because if you have to read a little paragraph to find the answer, say you've got to find 5 things, right? 5 different reasons why Leslie is brilliant. Then, if you've got a highlighter, you read the paragraph how many times? Once. So all you do is, right, I'm looking for 5 things. There's one. There's one. There's one. You do that as many times as you can. Get more than 5. It's always good to get more. I'll explain all this next week when we're doing understanding questions. Then, do all the legwork. Do all the highlighting first. So you're not doing there's one, highlight, go back to my paper. Right, I'm just writing the answer. Right, I'll go back to my paper. Right, where was I? There. It interrupts your chain of thought. So, highlight first, then start your bullet points, just going through them one at a time. Saves you having to reread the same bit over and over, same sentences over and over again, try to find the answer. And that cuts down on time too, to try and make sure you get to the end. See? Win-win! Right, a little task for you, since I know I'm boring you now. People that are still with me. Thank you if you're still here. Appreciate it. Mwah. So here's a wee sample RUAE question. What do you think the keywords are? So if these 3 were in front of you in the exam, what do you think the keywords would be? What would you highlight from the questions? So for example, number 1, look at lines 9 to 12, then identify, using your own words, 5 things we learn here about the dangers of plastic. Okay, so I'm not going to read them all out because I hate when people do that when they've got a PowerPoint. So all I want you to do is look at the 3 questions on the board. Hopefully you can see them. And then you're like that, try to see. Highlight or pretend to highlight the key words and then see what you think is important about, what are the important words in each question. Obviously you don't have them in front of you, so just imagine that you've got a highlighter pen at the screen. So what would you highlight? Okay, I'll just give you a minute to do that. Alexa, play. Alexa, stop. Thank you, doll. How'd you get on? What have you highlighted? Can't quite hear you. You need to come into my garden and just shout through the window. Please don't. It'll annoy the neighbours. If it was me doing it, this is what I would highlight. I'm hoping that you can see these. If not, I'll have to fiddle afterwards. Always good advice to highlight the line numbers because it keeps you focused on that particular bit. I'll talk a wee bit more about that next week. Using your own words. Very important to pay attention to that. Most marks are lost for understanding questions because kids have just lazily lifted the thing in front of them. We'll talk about more when I do the understanding lesson. The number 5. 5 things. That should automatically mean that you jump to your paper and go, pew, 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 pew! That's 5 bullet points. I didn't just attack someone. And then, dangers of plastic. That is the what am I being asked to look for. 5 dangers of plastic, right? I always say as well as highlighting the keywords of the question, I always say to my kids to circle the one key word. What is the key idea that I'm now looking for in the passage? And the key word here is dangers. What are the dangers of plastic? So that's the key word. That's why I've underlined, made it bold. Next one, again, line numbers. Then the word language, because I'm now looking at the writer's language. So I have to quote and identify techniques. And then newspapers are in decline. Again, keyword decline. That's what happens with my credit card all the time. Last one, line numbers again. 2 examples. I'm making sure that I'm answering enough. And then there's really just one other key word here. Contrast. So obviously a contrast is an opposite. Black, white, fat, thin, happy, sad. So a contrast is obviously 2 things. So that's why it's got the number 2 in it. I've already said that don't ever miss a mark out. You get marks for picking up quotes and things at National 5. Not at higher, I'm afraid. Sorry. So never, ever, 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 ever miss a question out if you can help it. Pay attention to the number of marks is really important, especially at higher, well, for both, but even more at higher, I would say, because you don't get any marks for quoting or identifying techniques. Sometimes the question will say, looking at least 2 examples. All kids see is 2, fine, quote, comment, done. No, it's worth 4 marks. Pay attention to the number 4, because really that's how many techniques you need to find. So that's just as important. Another thing that I like to do is, years ago, when you were doing old hire, some of your parents might have done that, or intermediate, next to the number of marks it used to have the letter U or A or E. They don't do that anymore. That's up to you to work out. Is it a U, A or E? But I always say, write that at the side, because the way you tackle those questions, a U compared to an A or an E, is completely different. And we'll go into that in more detail. So maybe write that at the side of the number of marks. Summary, read the whole passage, including the title, if there is one. Sometimes there's not, higher. And the context, that just tells you who wrote it, where it came from, and it gives you a sort of viewpoint. Take in your highlighter, write down, is it a U, A or an E, and use bullet points. You may also need to use headings, but we'll go into that in more detail. And that's basically it. That's the top tips of RUAE. Tomorrow, if you're tuning in, if it's not sunny, I might get more viewers. Come on, rain, snow, blizzards and hurricanes. Anyway, if you are tuning in, sorry, I've got a hair now. If you are tuning in, then tomorrow's topic is looking at persuasive writing topics. I'll start that, put my teeth in. Looking at topics that are good to use, and I'll give you some examples on that and what not to use, because some of you are already been asked by your schools to hand in plans and things like that, so we'll have a wee lesson on that tomorrow, so you'll be welcome to join. You might even want to wake up early and join us for our 10:30 session. No way, I hear you saying, please, I'm fun. Tomorrow morning's lesson for S1 to 3 is reading poetry, how you read poetry and get a wee chance to write your own. So you might like that. If you haven't already done so, please like, subscribe, share, tell your pals, tell your ma, tell everybody you know to tune in. You can join my Facebook page to get any work that I'm going to be putting on in the next few days. I promise. The apostrophes work is up, but I'm going to get everything else up soon. Then that's how to do it. It's on the screen. Just join my Aim Higher Facebook page, ask to join the group, and then I'll add you, and then you get the worksheets and stuff from that. And similarly, to make sure you don't miss out on these amazing lessons, please subscribe to my Aim Higher channel. And if you're not on Facebook for whatever reason, that there is how to join the Google Classroom, where I'm also going to be uploading the work. The work's going to be on both Word and PDF. If you don't want to print stuff off, then the choice is yours. So there's the codes on the screen. if you're joining the Google Classroom instead of the Facebook group. And lastly, just in case I have brightened your day, got your half-hour piece away from your child, I know what it's like. I have 3 children. If you would like to say thanks, Leslie, for being amazeballs, and it was such a fun lesson, you could even think, I'm going to buy you a wee cup of tea so you can send me a wee £1 via, and there's the address for the old PayPal account. I would really appreciate it. You don't have to, I just want to do my bit. Don't forget tonight, 8 o'clock, clap for our amazing carers. Hopefully you've enjoyed today, you've learned something, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Okay, have a fab day in the sun. It's sunny! It's sunny! Who ever thought? Alexa, play